Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Nassar 17 podcast. We're very blessed to have Doron here from all the way from Israel. And Doron is U.S. Special Forces, correct? From Israeli Special Forces.
Yes, sir.
And how long you been doing that?
I've actually been in the military since 2003. I started my military service. I got recruited into the Givati battalion, and then basically years on later ended up in the Home Front Command, started the search and rescue units known as the Palchatzim. And after that, I moved on to the Northern Command, and that's where I started my reserve duty in 2006, leading up to 2014 is where I spent most of my time in reserve duty in the Northern Command. And around 2017 is when I started um, my my new phase in reserve duty in the Special Forces community in the special mobility units of the paratrooper um, umbrella, if you will. It's not really the paratroopers, but there's like a bigger umbrella that has all the different paratrooper battalions in it, and we're the special mobility unit within that.
So, would you be like a quick reaction force, or would you be closer to a PJ or a Green Beret?
um, well, um, we do work with the PJs. That's one of our objectives is working with the PJs. We work with the ground PJs, including with the airlift, with the Blackhawks. Uh, we also work with a lot of the other tier one elements in the military. Um, but we're not really, I would say, a quick reaction force, meaning we're not supposed to take contact. We're not supposed to make contact with the enemy. Our goal is actually to go undetected, to mobilize behind enemy lines, to help mobilize units, to help mobilize supplies, to help evacuate wounded and or dead. That's essentially a lot of the operations that we do. Um, and so I think within the Green Berets, there's an element that does that, but I wouldn't qualify us as Green Berets. We're not that high SWIC, I guess you could say.
Yeah, just trying to help people understand because most
Yeah,
people don't know anything about how the IDF works, right? In the United
yeah,
States.
yeah,
So this is focused more to a United States audience, obviously.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so how are things going? The war seems to be pretty much over. Are you guys still getting attacked and rocketed, or how's that going?
Yeah, I mean, it's been relatively quiet, honestly. The last ballistic attack happened about a month ago when I was in the States traveling. In fact, the second night of my travels, I was in Miami and I get a phone call from my wife after I'd already seen the red alert, and I could see that that essentially there was a red alert in my community area, and so I knew that eventually my wife would give me a call and say, "Hey, here's what's happening," which she did. And so she told me it was really just another one of those hard nights. It was 3 a.m. Israel time. And you can imagine being a woman who's pregnant. At the time, she was 7 months pregnant. We have three young children under 13 and having to run to the shelters for the umpteenth time during this long drawn war that we've been in, where we've just passed the 500-day mark. Um, so yeah, I mean, it in a way it's slowed down as far as the rocket attacks on civilians. A lot of that is has to do with the negotiations with the United States and the new president. And I think a good thing that I can point out is that um, maybe there's a lot of things that we're seeing in the negotiations that a lot of us don't like. I don't like to see, for example, all the terrorists that are being released in exchange for innocent civilians. These are horrible terrorists that have committed some of the most horrible crimes, and you can only imagine the pain and the hurt for the families that had closure, knowing that this person was behind bars and that they're never going to get out, and now are being released for, a bunch of innocent civilians that did nothing, that simply either were at a party or were at their home in one of the kibbutzes, where they literally got snatched out of their bedrooms and out of a party. And it, so it's mixed feelings, but at the same time, I would say since Trump has got into his second term now, it's like everything is coming to like a screeching halt as far as the bombardment of rocket fire from the north, from Hezbollah, from Syria, from the Houthis, from Gaza. It seems like they're less. The way I'm interpreting it is that our enemies are less trigger happy all of a sudden. And all I'm asking myself is, what's the difference? What's changed, right? I mean, that's, what a lot of us are, who are, I think we're not really thinking about it because we've been used to just being under constant fire. So you're not really noticing that you're getting a breath of fresh air. But that's what it feels like, is like as if there's a breath of fresh air. Um, and there was one rocket fired from Gaza the other day. I think it was a few days ago, but unfortunately that landed into Gaza, and I believe it killed a 14-year-old girl, if I remember correctly. Um, so yeah, so I mean that's again unfortunate, and again falls squarely on Hamas, just like every other casualty from the war leading up to this moment has been. All of that has been thanks to these terrorists, or no thanks to them, rather.
Yeah, nobody, let's start by saying nobody likes to see civilian casualties. So if we see that in Gaza, nobody is pleased by that. But on the
Correct.
flip side, we hear, stories of, maybe Hamas will go into a hospital and take it over and hide in there and
Hmm.
force the doctors to fix their men, to repair their wounds and so forth. And we hear that they're fighting from like apartment buildings and stuff like that. So can you kind of touch on that and
Yeah.
paint the picture of, their fighting style is urban, of course, in nature, but
Yeah.
they're also not using standard tactics like fighting from a forward operating base or something like that.
Correct. It's actually worse than how you mentioned it. I wish they were forcing the medical staff to take care of them. I wish they were forcing their will upon the civilians in Gaza. The sad reality is that most of the Gazans in Gaza today um, are are terrorist sympathizers. They literally are supportive of Hamas. Every civilian, and I mean every civilian, if it be doctors, if it be lawyers, if it be uh, reporting, so if it's journalists, basically everything coming out of Gaza is controlled by Hamas. And and what I mean by controlled is that the narrative, the support, the cooperation, collaboration, everything that the terrorists are getting, they're getting it from the people. In fact, if the Gazans were not supporting Hamas, we would have crushed Hamas a long time ago. And that's the complexity and the hardship for us as the warfighter, is going into an area that is urbanly dense. It's not as dense as the world has portrayed it, though. It's not, there are places in the world that are way more congested, way more tight. There are tons of open areas in Gaza, contrary again to this myth that Gaza is as if like super super tight. But still, you have an urban area, and anytime you're fighting in an urban neighborhood with multi-storied buildings, um, with civilians there, etc., it makes it complex. And the terrorists themselves, they do not run around in military uniform like we do, right? So when you see our military coming into Gaza, you can clearly see here comes the IDF. But when we engage with the enemy is usually wearing um, tracksuits, They're wearing civilian clothing of some kind. Um, they usually will wear something that's easy to fight in. So they're not going to wear things that are kind of baggy or whatever. So usually it's something that they can put a combat vest on and that they can, maneuver easily in. And usually you'll see them wearing some kind of sports shoe. And that's essentially what we run into. Now, what's the problem with that? Is that I cannot differentiate between friend and foe, between combatant and non-combatant. And so one example I would say is when we've seen the footage of the hostages being released, you see all of a sudden you see that the Hamas guys somehow found their uniform, right? They all of a sudden remembered, oh yeah, there it is. Let me put my uniform on. It's all nice and pressed. They haven't been fighting in them. They're in nice, pristine condition. And they put on their little headband, and all of a sudden now they are heroes. They are openly combatants. Why? Because they know that an Israel airstrike isn't going to come and eliminate that whole crowd because of the hostages. So that's the only time that they feel brave enough and tough enough for the promotion of their PR and their propaganda to the Gazans that, hey, we did this. It's kind of like a beating on your chest kind of moment. When in reality, I've not seen one terrorist like that. And I'm telling you, not one. And we've seen hundreds of terrorists in my unit. Um, Most of the soldiers I've spoken to in the field, um, not any of us have seen, to my knowledge. And again, this is just my little small sphere of the combat that we've been in. But again, we've been in almost everywhere where the war fighting has been happening, and we haven't seen one Hamas terrorist in full military kit. Usually, you'll catch them with their weapons, like I said, in civilian clothing, and then they conveniently will discharge their weapons when they feel that they're not willing to die for their religion, and rather they want to go into Israeli prisons and they want to get treated like kings, and they know that, and they know that we have huge sympathy for them, um, in contrast to what they have towards us, and that Israel is going to basically take care of them and not treat them the way they've treated our hostages. But that's not for the rest of the people though. So the rest of the people have actually been so brainwashed that when they see the soldiers, you see them shake and they're terrified, and that's how I know it's a civilian uh, um,
And not a
uh,
combatant.
and not a combatant. Is that you can tell that because that's what they're used to, and that's what they're told by the Hamas terrorists, that we're the bad guy and that we're going to commit this evil to them and do what Hamas does to the Gazans. Forget what Hamas does to Jews or to Israelis. I mean, we've seen the footage of the prisons where people are like tossed down flights of stairs. They're beaten into pulp. They're humiliated. They're tortured. Um, I mean, I don't want to give a whole long list of all the horrible things that we've seen, but the way they treat their own, it's pretty brutal. So it's both a rule through fear and intimidation, but also the rest of the population just kind of swallows this pill, and this infatuation. It's almost like the Nazi party in a way. You know how they ruled through fear and intimidation, but it's like the masses really were brainwashed and we're all saluting the Heil Hitler and doing the whole thing, almost like they were zombies. And that's what I've seen in Gaza, and it's very sad because it gives me very little hope for any future for the Gazans, which I know Trump has taken a lot of heat for, the plan that he's proposed with through his government, which is essentially to do a restart with Gaza. But I personally don't see any future for Gaza with the Gazans that are living there today to be a good neighbor. In my
Because
opinion,
of the brainwashing.
because of the brainwashing. In my opinion, we gotta get rid of them. They have to go. And I know that sounds harsh. I've never believed that. I've never, before kind of said that out loud or made that into a point. Um, but again, from everything that I've seen, I don't see any future for the Gazans themselves and or for the a relationship with Israel that is not going to turn again very violent and very toxic.
So because most of Gaza is, you can't live in it. It's uninhabitable because the buildings have been destroyed. And